As Israel's aggression on Gaza intensify, international efforts for a ceasefire grow more urgent. Leaders of Egypt, France, and Jordan are calling for an immediate halt to hostilities and the resumption of humanitarian aid in their joint statement following the Trilateral summit in Cairo. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Washington has raised questions about the new Gaza deal they are currently working on. How will the diplomatic efforts by Egypt, Jordan, France, and other Arab states achieve a lasting peace? How will Israel respond to international calls for de-escalation? And what impact will Netanyahu's talks with President Trump have on the future of Gaza? I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Welcome to In Depth. Earlier today, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and French President Emmanuel Macron arrived at the North Sinai city of El Arish to assess key humanitarian sites vital for Gaza relief efforts. According to Al-Ahram Online, the two leaders also toured El Arish Hospital, where they checked on injured Palestinians, many of whom have been brought to Egypt through the Rafah border crossing since the beginning of the war on Gaza. A statement from the French presidency revealed that Macron intends to urge the reopening of crossing points for the delivery of humanitarian goods into Gaza during his visit. Additionally, Macron's visit comes as thousands of Egyptians gathered in El Arish to protest against U.S. and Israeli plans to displace Palestinians from their homeland. As diplomatic efforts intensify, world leaders push for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The Egyptian-French-Jordanian summit held in Cairo called for a ceasefire in Gaza and a halt to Israeli aggression as global concerns about the humanitarian crisis grow.
In a bid to end the devastating conflict in Gaza, international diplomatic efforts are ramping up, with the Egyptian, French, and Jordanian leaders urging the world to support a swift ceasefire. At a summit held in Cairo, the leaders emphasized the critical need for the reinstatement of the ceasefire and the resumption of humanitarian aid to Gaza. The summit's joint statement called for the immediate end to the war, the implementation of a detainee exchange deal, and the protection of civilians, stressing the importance of adhering to international law. They also voiced their support for the upcoming Gaza Reconstruction Conference, set to take place in Cairo. The resumption of Israeli aggression has worsened the already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, with over 50,000 Palestinians killed and countless others injured since the start of the conflict. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington for crucial talks with U.S. President Donald Trump, where the latter expressed his desire for the war on Gaza to end. In the second meeting since Trump took office, Netanyahu told reporters that he and Trump has discussed the U.S. leader's bold vision to displace Palestinians from Gaza, and that he is working with Trump on another deal to release additional detainees. Netanyahu, who faces pressure at home to secure a ceasefire, claimed that Israel is committed to enabling the people of Gaza to freely choose where they want to go. This is a blatant reference to the Israeli-American displacement schemes for Gaza's people, which are firmly rejected and condemned by Egypt, France, and Jordan. The situation continues to evolve as the leaders of Egypt, Jordan, and other Arab countries work to rally international support for a sustainable ceasefire and a resolution to the conflict. The coming weeks will be critical in determining whether diplomacy can halt the violence or if Israeli aggression will persist.
And for more analysis, we're joined from Cairo by Mr. Ihab Omar, journalist at Al Ahram newspaper, and Mr. Khalid Dawood, Al Ahram weekly managing editor. Welcome to In Depth, and I would start with you, Mr. Omar. Now, Netanyahu's visit to Washington is seen as pivotal. What key messages do you believe Israel is trying to convey to the U.S. administration at this time, especially coinciding with Macron's visit to Egypt?
To you and to the honorable guest, Mr. Khalid, and to the viewers. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was hoping to set a time frame to bomb Iran during his meeting with President Trump, whether individually or in cooperation with the United States. Netanyahu also sought to gain the 17% new tariff on Israel. He wanted to reduce it, and also he wanted to gain the American support or open blessing to continue the military operation on the Gaza Strip. The fourth point that Netanyahu wanted to discuss is some type of U.S. support to confront the Iranian presence in Syria. Today morning, the United States and President Donald Trump did not approve of any of these 4 points, and he talked to Netanyahu that first of all there is an initiative for a ceasefire in Gaza, and he has to meet with Steve Witkoff, the U.S. convoy to the Middle East. Trump also rejected the cancellation of the 17% tariff on Israeli goods, and for the first time Trump talked positively and with affection about the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. So he closed the doors before Netanyahu regarding a proxy war on Syria, and I requested Netanyahu to be realistic regarding the Israeli demands regarding Syria and Turkey. The fourth point was related to the military operation on Gaza, and Trump did not talk at all about the military operation on Gaza, and he mainly spoke about the peace process. Yesterday, Trump also reiterated the idea of the Gazans' displacement, which is the only solution, but it was in a slower tone, and he gave the Gazan population the right to choose. Of course, we do not tolerate this idea in any way, but what happened yesterday, in my opinion, was prompted by the Trilateral meeting in Cairo, which turned into a four-party meeting with the French president and the Egyptian president and Jordanian king, and then joined later by President Trump minutes before his meeting with Netanyahu, as the Egyptian mediation now is leading and has always been leading the hopes for hope and revival of peace for the Palestinian people and for all those who endeavor to find peace in the Middle East. And
I will get to that point, sir, but I would go now to Mr. Dawood and ask you, Mr. Dawood, how significant is Netanyahu's recent visit to Washington in terms of the war on Gaza and the efforts to reach a ceasefire?
Well, thanks, Hala, for having me. In regards to my colleague, Mr. Omar, I think practically Mr. Netanyahu, Israeli Prime Minister, was summoned to the White House in order to be informed about the upcoming direct talks which the United States plans to hold with Iran for the first time. Actually, in many years, even under the Biden administration, there were no such talks on a new nuclear deal. Of course, Mr. Netanyahu, in regular circumstances, would strongly oppose any talks with Iran and would only call for military solutions. But now, with Trump in office, probably Mr. Netanyahu got some surprising statements concerning these direct negotiations with Iran. And of course, he cannot oppose Trump like he used to do with former President Biden or even Obama. So I was reading even Israeli newspapers that mentioned that basically Mr. Netanyahu came out of this meeting relatively empty-handed. But he was going there hoping to display a special kind of relationship, getting an exemption from the tariffs that Mr. Trump has imposed on all world countries. But nevertheless, there was no pledge of that sort of the country. There was a reminder that Israel is a large recipient of American military aid, $4 billion a year. And at the same time, beside the surprise about the direct talks with Iran, and despite the green light that the American administration and Mr. Witkoff, President Trump's Middle East envoy, have given to Israel to restart its military attack and aggression against Gaza, we heard maybe a relative kind of indirect statement from Mr. Trump that they are working on another ceasefire deal. Unfortunately, it's not the original ceasefire deal that was negotiated by Mr. Witkoff a few days before Trump came into office. But I mean, again, that's why the meetings in Cairo was important yesterday. The situation between President Sisi, French president, and King Abdullah, it was very important to send a message to Trump that the situation in Gaza is unbearable, that it's basically goes beyond any reason of whatsoever kind. Since Israel has resumed its military aggression against Gaza on March 18, we're talking about at least 1,500 Palestinians who were killed, including 500 children and 100 women. I mean, the humanitarian situation is extremely dire. That's why it was also important for President Macron of France to go to Arish himself and to see the backlog of hundreds of trucks that have been waiting for weeks to get into Gaza to deliver the much needed humanitarian aid. So basically, before Netanyahu met with US President Donald Trump, I think it was significant that Trump was eager to hold a phone call with President Sisi, President Macron of France, and King Abdullah of Jordan, to kind of get to know the feeling on the ground. I mean, Mr. Netanyahu can lie as much as he wants about the situation in Gaza, make whatever allegations he wants to make, but it was very important that President Sisi, President Macron, King Abdullah openly express their deep worries and alarm over the continuation of the current Israeli aggression in Gaza, especially Hala, that it was unlikely to achieve any of the purposes that Netanyahu has declared. Netanyahu keeps on claiming that military pressure is the only way to get the hostages out. Practically speaking, he tried that before for 15 months, before the recent ceasefire, and it never worked. Hostages are released only through negotiations.
Yes, I get your point. Mr. Omar, Trump and Netanyahu have both said that they are working on a new deal to release more detainees, but they didn't disclose any details about this deal. What do you think the terms of that deal are? And does it mean that Israel is ready to end its aggression, or it's just a camouflage as usual?
It was a surprise yesterday for the Prime Minister to have this US request live going to negotiations and with the new mediations. As Mr. Khalid stated, it was a surprise for Netanyahu, the idea of the US negotiations with Iran. So now Israel is facing confusion and they are reviewing their spaces to stall what happened yesterday, and the Trump agreements, and I want to say, frankly, the U.S. demands from Israel, because U.S. is managing the situation. And despite of all the Jewish or Zionist propaganda that Israel is the one in control and in charge, and they have an actual say running what's happening inside Washington. Now Netanyahu is forced to talk to Steve Witkoff and to send representatives from the Mossad to Arab capitals, the Cairo or Doha, for a new round of negotiations and talks. Of course, he is under a lot of pressures from the internal Israeli side. For a long time, the Israeli society is not even interested in the idea that Israel annexes new lands from Syria or Lebanon. The main interest focuses on the release of detainees, whether the ones alive or the dead bodies. And there is also the idea, the expansion ideas that are not of great interest for the new Israeli generation. They are only talking about bringing back the detainees. So Netanyahu now is under the pressures of the Israeli society, who will support the Trump vision to halt the hostilities in the Gaza Strip and going for negotiations to bring back a new round of detainees in exchange for the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. We are in the phase of the reproduction of the truce, but in a slower pace. In exchange, the land in exchange for the detainees, there are no more Palestinian major requests in the file of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons.
Okay. Mr. Dawood, how might the upcoming Gaza Reconstruction Conference in Cairo, which the joint statement the Trilateral Summit voiced support for, actually affect U.S. foreign policy in the region, and will it create pressure on Israel, in your own opinion?
Well, Hala, I mean, first comes first. I mean, before the conference can be held, war in Gaza has to stop. I mean, and there has to be a clear vision on how the future of Gaza is going to be. I mean, again, it's really sad that the U.S. administration doesn't really care about carrying out the agreements that it mediates. But at the end of the day, they are working in total coordination with the Israeli side. We even heard from Mr. Witkoff, the U.S. envoy, that perhaps the Israeli military aggression and genocide war and the crimes they are committing might be helpful in putting more pressure on Hamas to accept the Israeli demands for the release of the largest number possible of Israeli hostages. As you know, Mr. Witkoff has suggested the release of 5 Israeli living hostages and some of the dead bodies. But Mr. Netanyahu is insisting on a larger number, nearly 11 living Israeli hostages, without, again, providing the guarantees that Hamas has been demanding all the way through, which is an end to the war and a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. Mr. Netanyahu wants to get the hostages back without withdrawing his troops, with maintaining his security control over Gaza, and without any alternative plan on how to administer the Palestinian territories, particularly Gaza, except for this absurd plan that Mr. Netanyahu has backed and proposed by Mr. Trump about the forced displacement of the Palestinian people. So, I mean, again, war has to stop first. There has to be an agreement of the future of Gaza, and that's where the Egyptian plan that was backed by Arab countries and European nations, African nations, Islamic countries is very important, because it puts forward a path for the reconstruction of Gaza without carrying out the forced displacement of the Palestinian people, who have legitimate rights. I mean, actually, it was very frustrating and depressing, Hala, yesterday, to listen to President Trump wondering why did Israel pull out of Gaza in the first place. He does not recognize, he does not see the plight of the Palestinian people, the plight of continuous Israeli occupation for nearly 60 years, and how illegitimate this has been seen by the entire international community, by the UN Security Council. There are so many international resolutions and conventions that call for Israel to withdraw its troops, and that's why Israel now not just had to withdraw from Gaza, but also from the West Bank, and allow the establishment of a Palestinian state. So while Israel has no option or has no kind of alternative, but killing and more killing. Egypt is offering a very phased
Killing
plan,
and
not just
establishing
for-
more settlements as well in the West Bank and in Gaza.
That's another major,
Yes.
major problem and obstacle to the aspirations
Yes.
of the Palestinian people to have their own independent
Yes.
state, for sure.
Yes. Mr. Omar, the leaders of Egypt, France and Jordan at the Trilateral Summit held in Cairo called for an international endorsement of the Arab Islamic plan for the reconstruction of Gaza, proposed, of course, by Egypt. Now, how do you foresee the outcome of the international mobilization for this plan?
In my opinion, the findings on the ground in the Gaza Strip gives evidence that there is no other alternatives other than the Egyptian initiative now called the Arab Islamic Reconstruction Plan. But eventually it is the only viable plan to be applied because it is the most realistic and the most taking into consideration the safety of the Gazans and also the presence of the Egyptian army in the sea area in the Sinai Peninsula in any attempt by Israel to evacuate Palestinians into Sinai or into Egypt. So no matter how Israel tries to displace the Palestinians into Palestinian Rafah, hoping for some kind of interaction and running through the borders, it is completely unrealistic and is not going to happen. And it was supported by the heavy military existence on the Egyptian borders. And all of this is to protect the Palestinian people from this conspiracy of displacement. And that's why Trump, when he spoke yesterday about his ideas regarding the displacement, he was less enthusiastic, talking in a softer tone, and he did not bring it up as a fact. He only talked about giving the Palestinians the right to get out, the right to choose. So now he is adopting a more understanding approach for the situation. And Trump in a different file regarding the tariffs and breaking out a trade war on an international level. He's trying to cool down the situation in the Middle East. He's more enthusiastic. He's not very enthusiastic to continue the military operations on Gaza. At first, he really wanted to achieve this displacement scheme and to take more lands in Syria and Lebanon. But now it is different. He is seeking to cool down the situation, and he is resorting to negotiations. These negotiations also with Oman and Iran is an evidence that Trump is adopting a completely new approach. All of these factors are international factors influencing Trump perspective that they are considering, and they think now that it is better to prevail stability in the Middle East, especially in Gaza and the displacement issue. We have seen a completely different Trump that he reminds me kind of with the wisdom approach that he adopted in his first term. The Egyptian initiative is the only viable option and the most realistic to be applied in the day next to the war in the Gaza Strip, with everyone's blessing. We're talking about the European Union, Russia, China, and Iran. Only the United States and Israel are the parties opposing this initiative.
Okay. Mr. Dawood, Trump has said that he wants the war on Gaza to end. How does this statement align with the U.S. support for the resumption of the Israeli war on Gaza, breaking, of course, the ceasefire? I mean, it's very odd. I want you to answer me briefly. Isn't it strange that Trump is presenting himself as the man of peace, that he wants to end the war on Gaza, at the same time fully supporting the genocide, fully supporting Benjamin Netanyahu's approach in Gaza?
Well, he made this statement yesterday, as you mentioned, Hala, that he wants the war in Gaza to end, but he provided no details. He said it will end sometime soon. Again, now all attention is going to be concentrated on the Iranian issue. Mr. Trump, he's trying to distract from the global chaos that came after the recent tariffs he imposed on the rest of the world. So right now, he's hoping to achieve any kind of success on the diplomatic front. Let it be some development in the talks with Iran, or perhaps a restoration of the ceasefire in Gaza. But let's not fool ourselves. I mean, judging by the way Mr. Trump speaks, I spoke yesterday during the news conference with Netanyahu. He sees eye to eye with the most right-wing extremist Zionists in Israel, denying Palestinian rights. He only sees Israeli victims, the prisoners who were released from Hamas in Gaza, but he does not see the massive number of Palestinians who get killed, the Palestinian American children who was killed in Jerusalem yesterday. He makes no reference to him. So again, let's hope that the Arab side at least can speak in the language which Mr. Trump understands well, which is that of interests and American investments and those kinds of priorities, because creating chaos and not stopping the war will definitely harm American interests.
That was Mr. Khalid Dawood, Al-Ahram Weekly Managing Editor. Thank you so much. And Mr. Ihab Omar, journalist at Al-Ahram newspaper. Thank you very much for both of you for your valuable insights. And this brings us to the end of today's episode of In Depth. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.